Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the fic entitled Not in the Job Description. Here's the summary. Hitoshi wasn't very fond of new things, but when Aizawa suddenly shows up with a very cute, very new babysitter for Eri, he may consider his previous ideology. Or maybe change could be good. This is the first fic in this author's series entitled That One Shinzuku Babysitter AU. So you can classify this as a one-shot standalone if you'd like to, but I plan to do the entire series. So this will be not in the job description. Hitoshi was not very fond of new things. It went directly hand with his hatred for abrupt changes in his otherwise perfectly scheduled daily routine. Once upon a time, about 12 years ago to be exact, Hitoshi had not been very fond of Aizawa, his adoptive father. He was 5 when Aizawa took him away from the countless foster homes, lonely nights, and even lonelier days. He didn't know it at the time, with him being 5 years old, of course, but Aizawa had saved him. And after several months of complete stubbornness, Hitoshi had learned to accept his very new, suddenly very blessed life. And then Eri happened. Don't misunderstand, Hitoshi absolutely adored Eri. He loved her more than anyone else in the entire world, probably. But it hadn't always been that way. Aizawa adopted Eri when she was only a few months old. Meanwhile, Hitoshi was nearing his 10th birthday and had no future ambitions of being an older brother. Needless to say, the adoption had been very sudden, and he didn't like it one bit. And though he wasn't cruel to Eri, he'd never gone out of his way to be especially kind to her, especially not during the beginning of it all. But of course, as all things went, Hitoshi eventually warmed up to his new little sister. It took a couple of months to get used to the mere idea of even having a sibling to begin with, but once Eri had shot him one of her wide, gummy smiles, he was entirely hers. From that moment on, Hitoshi prided himself in being Eri's big brother, and there was nothing he loved more. Over the course of the next 7 amazing years, everything was perfect. Aizawa was hired at UA to be a teacher, Eri successfully developed an incredibly strong quirk, and Hitoshi was readily accepted into UA's hero course on recommendations, a dream of his since he could remember. Everything, and he meant everything, was as it should be, perfectly in place, absolutely nothing out of order. And then, there was always an and then. This is Midoriya Zuku, Eri's new babysitter. Midoriya Zuku was certainly new, and unannounced. Hitoshi wasn't counting their first meeting as a prerequisite because, knowing Aizawa, this was planned. He was almost never on time after school. Being a teacher at UA kept him busy, that was certain. So for him to somehow magically have time available to introduce them to their new nanny was no coincidence. Hitoshi, obviously displeased with this new and sudden development, pointedly glared at his father, more upset at the fact that Aizawa hadn't bothered to tell him beforehand that he hired a complete stranger to watch his little sister, than with the actual stranger. Midoriya didn't seem harmful. In fact, he looked anything but, with his childishly freckled cheeks and meek disposition, but he was new, and Hitoshi was not very fond of new. Midoriya didn't stand a chance. Since your brother started at UA, he won't be able to take care of you after school like he usually does, Aizawa explained to Eri, who didn't seem at all perturbed at the perfect stranger standing in the middle of their living room. In fact, she seemed a little excited. Says who? Hitoshi rebutted, pettily. Aizawa shot him a look, his eyes glowing a faint red color. Says me, unless you want to take care of a 7-year-old after hero training. Hitoshi met his glare, fully prepared to argue against his point when seemingly out of nowhere Midoriya Zuku finally pulled enough gall together to speak. You're in the hero course? Hitoshi turned to face him, and judging by the way Midoriya subtly shrank into himself, he was sure he hadn't entirely meant to voice his question out loud. Of course he is. Nissan is the best hero in the entire world, Eri chimed in enthusiastically, never afraid to show her unconditional love and support for her big brother. Aizawa sighed, while Hitoshi preened. I did tell you I worked at UA, right? The man asked, directing his question toward a flushed Midoriya. The boy nodded rapidly. Yes, you did. I just didn't know your son was in the hero course. He turned to Hitoshi, his shoulders hiking up an inch, squishing his cheeks against his face. That's really cool. Hitoshi assessed him for a moment, unused to sincere compliments coming from anyone other than Aizawa and Eri. Begrudgingly accepting the kind words, Hitoshi nodded once and pointedly glanced away, finding Eri's eyes and smiling when she offered him a goofy grin. Right. Aizawa sighed again, rubbing the corners of his eyes. I have to get back to UA, finish up some paperwork. Midoriya will be here if you need anything, you can ask him. He turned away from Eri and over to the boy. Right, Midoriya? The aforementioned tensed, squeaking out an affirmation in response to the underlying threat beneath a seemingly innocent question. Aizawa knew how to intimidate people, that was for sure. With a kiss to Eri's forehead and a mussing of Hitoshi's already messy hair, Aizawa was out the door and headed back to UA. Eri wasted no time in making Midoriya her new playmate. "Nii-chan, let's draw!" she exclaimed, grabbing Midoriya's hand and tugging him toward her room where she kept all her arts and crafts supplies. Okay, Midoriya smiled, pausing for a moment before glancing over his shoulder and directly at Hitoshi, hopeful smile and all. "Would you like to join us, Hitoshi-kun?" Hitoshi owlishly blinked, the sudden invitation throwing him off an embarrassing amount. His backpack jostled, and he was back in his head. "I have to study, sorry," he muttered, nearly jumping out of his skin when Midoriya overlapped him in understanding. "Oh, right, I'm sorry. Of course, you're a hero student. You have to study. Come on, Eri-chan, let's not disturb him," he said, turning back to the little girl who happily led him back towards her room, blabbering on about paints and colored pencils. Midoriya turned over his shoulder once more, aiming a timid smile his way. "It was nice meeting you." The door to Eri's bedroom slammed closed before he could get a single word in. Not that there was much he wanted to say. Maybe return the sentiment at the very least, because despite being new, Midoriya had potential. Maybe this change would be a good one. As time usually did, it passed. An eventful month went by at UA leading directly up to the sports festival, and being so preoccupied with training, he'd seen less and less of Eri and Midoriya and more of his father and his classmates. During his month-long training regimen, he'd seen Midoriya only a handful of times, never exchanging more than a polite greeting with him. He'd developed a repetitive routine, greet Midoriya and Eri, head straight for his room to knock out his homework, and then promptly fall asleep for the rest of the afternoon. And it paid off, he supposed, all the sacrifices he made for the sake of the sports festival, seeing as he placed third overall. He certainly could have done better, but bronze wasn't so horrible for only being a first year. Hitoshi practically trembled on the train ride home, adrenaline and excitement buzzing throughout his entire body. Eri had been watching. She'd told him as much before they left for school that morning. He wanted to show her his medal, tell her his first-hand experiences, to promise that he'd place first next time. The second the train slowed to a stop, at the station closest to the house, he booked it, exerting his muscles one final time for the day, for Eri. He bursted through the front doors like a madman, broad grin stretched across his face, medal in one hand and backpack hanging in the other. Eri bounded toward him immediately, TV long forgotten in favor of the real thing. "Hitoshi Nii-san!" she cried, nearly slamming into his legs. Hitoshi hooked his hands underneath her arms and swung her in the air, laughing along with her as she let out little snorts and giggles. "Nii-san, we saw you on the TV!" Eri reported enthusiastically, pointing in the direction of their TV. A smiling Midoriya sat directly in front of it, no doubt enjoying the program with the little girl. "You were awesome!" Hitoshi grinned and placed her back on the ground, slipping his medal around her neck and watching as she gasped down at the bronze. "Is this the one from the TV?" she exclaimed, not giving him a chance to answer before she bolted for her bedroom, yelling nonsense about making him a gift. Hitoshi chuckled at her enthusiasm before sluggishly making his way toward the couch, not having the energy to walk all the way to his bedroom. Midoriya turned to him from the ground, the coffee table in the middle of the room keeping them a good ways apart from each other. Hitoshi's stomach twinged with something. You did amazing out there," he said, breaking the brief awkward silence. "Third place is incredible. I doubt many could even fathom placing at all." The exhaustion was slowly taking its toll, but despite that, Hitoshi did his best to be present. He hadn't spoken to Midoriya since their stunted first meeting. He owed him as much to at least be conscious during their first real conversation. "Thanks," he ultimately settled with, quickly finding a different topic to get him talking again. "How was Eri?" Midoriya suddenly smiled, and all was good in the world. Hitoshi blinked deliberately slowly. Maybe he should have just gone straight to his room. "She was great. I picked her up from school, and I helped her with homework. Then she tried to help me with mine." Midoriya's sentence dissolved into a little giggle. "Then I turned on the TV, and we watched the sports fest. She really loved seeing you on the screen." Hitoshi smiled fondly, just imagining it all happening in real time. Eri bouncing around the living room, Midoriya trying to contain her excitement. She must have been a handful. "How did you like it?" Hitoshi asked, growing a little curious about Midoriya's own experience. He remembered his contained excitement upon hearing Hitoshi was a hero student during their first meeting. Me? Midoriya pointed a timid finger to himself, his lips forming a tight-lipped smile. Hitoshi beckoned for him to continue. Well, I've always watched the Sports Fest. I haven't missed one probably since I was 6. They were all super exciting, but I think this one might be my favorite one yet. Hitoshi watched him expectantly, waiting for him to elaborate. Midoriya continued timidly, probably sensing the silent question. Spending it with Eri-chan was super fun. She made it a lot more exciting, and I also got to cheer for someone I know for the first time. That changed the entire experience for me. Hitoshi sort of melted, the exhaustion and Midoriya's adorable honesty doing terrible things to him. You were cheering for me? He asked, patiently waiting for Midoriya's abrupt embarrassment to fizzle out. The boy was bright red and twisted into an overwhelmed pretzel. The question had been taken in the wrong way, it seemed. I'm sorry. I know that's probably sort of weird because we barely even know each other, and I'm just the babysitter, so it's not like we're even friends, but I would like to be friends. Hitoshi quickly cut in, silencing Midoriya's blabbering and stammering in an instant. His shoulders were tensed and hiked all the way up to his ears, lips pressed into a thin line, and cheeks stained a dark red. You would? Really? He winced over a voice crack. Hitoshi shrugged, supposedly indifferent. Yeah, I would. Midoriya's cheeks glowed, a tiny smile spreading across his face as he nodded his head once in agreement. I'd like that too. Nissan, your present is done, Eri exclaimed, running toward them, proudly holding up a drawing of Hitoshi and her, both wearing medals around their necks and holding hands with one another. It was adorable. Hitoshi's heart nearly popped. Being a big brother really was the best. Eri, this is beautiful, thank you. He smiled, accepting the gift and proudly showing it off to Midoriya, who beamed across from him. Wow, Eri-chan, that's an amazing drawing, he complimented earnestly, offering her a smile when she joined him on the floor again. I was going to add you too, Ni-chan, but I couldn't find the right colors for your eyes. Eri pouted, genuinely appearing upset. Hitoshi snorted, while Midoriya rushed to console her, waving his hands manically, blabbering nonsense in his haste. That's okay. You didn't have to add me in anyway, he reassured quickly, his face creased with embarrassed laughter. Eri argued something incoherent, reaching up with her little hands and squeezing Midoriya's cheeks, comically puckering his lips outward. Hitoshi watched the exchange from the couch, his expression subconsciously softening at the sight. Eri seemed to really like him, Midoriya, and if Eri could learn to trust him, so could he. Maybe. There's always next time, right? Hitoshi suddenly spoke, interrupting the moment. Midoriya's mouth gaped, seemingly unsure of what to say to something like that. Eri readily agreed. I can draw whenever I want, but Nissan is right. She grinned, grabbing Midoriya's face again, her touch more gentle than the first time. You were cheering for Nissan with me. You deserve a medal, too. Midoriya flushed, resembling that of a strawberry, with his wild green hair and freckled cheeks. Hitoshi bit the inside of his cheek and kept the observation to himself. Oh, okay then, he smiled. Hesitant and timid it was. His smile fluttered over to Hitoshi for a moment, disappearing behind his eyelids as they squeezed into a broader grin. Next time. Hitoshi's heart squeezed. He blinked. Oh. A week of childish avoidance later, and Hitoshi had ultimately come to the realization that maybe, probably, he sort of had a little tiny, he could not stress how small, crush on Eri's babysitter. The one he vehemently swore off upon first meeting him, the one he was sure would be a hindrance in his otherwise perfectly normal life, and while this new development was definitely new, it wasn't exactly a hindrance, though maybe it was, and Hitoshi didn't have the guts to admit it. Midoriya didn't go to UA. Mercifully, he didn't go to UA. He'd probably never even set foot near the school, but despite that, despite the perfectly great boundary between his home life and school, Midoriya was pretty much all he thought about during class. Everything, and he meant everything, somehow reminded him of Midoriya. The grass outside the school building, green, Midoriya, green eyes and hair, pretty. His classmates, Sue has green hair, just like Midoriya. His own father, Aizawa, leads to Eri, leads to Midoriya. That's right, Midoriya, after school. It was never ending. So maybe this little tiny, very small crush was a mental hindrance. But that was all it was, mental. It hadn't distracted him from any of his hero work, he thought. His grades were great, his social life was okay, and his relationship with his family was stupidly amazing. Hitoshi's life was practically perfect, looking from the outside in. It was just this very sudden crush that blurred everything together. One thing was the other, this was that, 1 + 1 = 4, it was all muddled. And it was only getting worse the longer he avoided getting cornered into a conversation with Midoriya, reverting back to the clipped greetings and beelines for his bedroom. To Midoriya, it must have looked terrible out of context. Hitoshi had caught a quick glance at the way his face fell every time he brushed past them in the living room, not even pausing for a moment to at least greet Eri with a pat on the head, a hug, anything. But the avoidance stopped today. Hitoshi promised himself that it would, because if he couldn't confront his own very small feelings, very minuscule feelings, how was he ever going to be a hero? Baby steps, that's how. Turns out actually entering his house while being fully aware that Midoriya was waiting inside, even if he wasn't waiting for him, counted as a baby step. A very large baby step, he felt, but a step in the right direction nonetheless. He tightened his grip around his backpack straps and inhaled a sharp breath through his nose, readying himself for Midoriya's chirpy greeting from the living room floor, his and Eri's favorite spot. Hitoshi grabbed the doorknob and pushed it open, his short-lived confidence already failing him. Their usual spot was vacant. Bad, not in the scenario of possibilities he'd imagined on the train. New. Eri-chan, please come out. That was also new, and bad, very, very bad. Hitoshi quickly bounded forward, slamming the door behind him in his effort to get inside the Genkin faster. Midoriya? He called, listening for the frantic footsteps he'd only heard a few seconds prior. Midoriya, what happened? Where's Eri? The boy in question manifested in front of him, eyes frantic and red-rimmed, and his hands alternating from pulling at the roots of his hair to wrapping across his chest almost protectively. Hitoshi-kun! He broke off into a dry sob, his stomach visibly heaving. He looked green, greener than usual. I can't find her. I can't. We were playing hide-and-seek, and now I can't find her. It took every ounce of self-control to not join in on his panic. Eri was missing bad, very bad, but Midoriya already knew that, clearly. It wouldn't do either of them any good to get anxiously irritated. If he pretended this was just another civilian rescue training, his anxiety wouldn't boil over and he wouldn't accidentally snap at the boy he was currently trying to pursue. Snapping would surely ruin any chance at a relationship, and Hitoshi refused to let that happen. Okay, hey, he said, voice as placating as it could be. Midoriya's frenzied eyes paused on him, and Hitoshi took the opportunity. Breathe through your nose. Breathe and hold it in your chest for 5 seconds. No, I can't, Midoriya whispered breathlessly, his body attempting to concave on itself. Hitoshi was almost 85% sure that Midoriya was on the verge of a hysterical panic attack, and while touching someone while they're overstimulated usually wasn't the best idea, he was going to bite the bullet and try it anyway, because Hitoshi was a hero and helping people was what heroes did. Right? He gripped tightly on Midoriya's wrist and placed his palm firmly against his chest. Try breathing. Midoriya stared at him, at their hands, Hitoshi's chest, and inhaled a tremulous breath. Hitoshi nodded, coaching him through it. He'd gone through his own fair share of panic attacks before, Aizawa enlisting himself as his coach during his breakdowns. Being on the receiving end of the comfort, he'd never truly understood what it was that gave Aizawa that worried glint in his eye. With Midoriya's imploring eyes looking to him for help and comfort, he felt that maybe he finally understood the odd urge to protect that seemed to go hand in hand with the coaching, because he wanted nothing more than to hold him. Just hold him and keep him safe. Good, that's good. Now exhale through your mouth. Midoriya's breathing hitched countless times as he sighed out a long and stuttered breath. They practiced together, Hitoshi patient throughout the entire ordeal. When Midoriya was able to at least exhale without having to pause in between breaths, Hitoshi took it as a win and hoped he would be okay to talk. Okay, he said, hand hovering awkwardly in the air, wanting to offer more comfort but unsure how. He dropped the appendage to his side, forgetting the idea altogether. Tell me what happened. Midoriya grappled with his hands, bringing them anxiously out in front of him as he slowly recounted the moments leading up to Eri's disappearance. Eri-chan wanted to play hide-and-seek. I said I would count while she hid. I counted to 60. A minute. It was only a minute, Midoriya whispered, his voice thin with horribly concealed horror. His eyes suddenly welled with tears, and Hitoshi's heart stuttered. I counted to 60, and I looked everywhere. And she's nowhere. I lost her. Hitoshi glanced at his closed bedroom door and quickly doubted Midoriya's claims of looking everywhere. Not that he was blaming Midoriya for respecting his privacy, but Eri played dirty and she didn't play fair. She knew what she was doing. though he highly doubted she considered it would escalate to the point of Midoriya nearly having a panic attack every time their eyes met. Eri wasn't cruel, but she was a kid, and kids could be the littlest shits. She was no exception to that. "Midoriya, breathe," he reminded gently, finally having the gall to grip his shoulder, squeezing around it in hopes of being comforting. I'm sorry, he whispered, quickly wiping at his eyes and inhaling a snot-filled breath. You should just arrest me. I'm a horrible person, and even worse babysitter. Put me in jail." Hitoshi blinked, nearly gaping as Midoriya presented his wrist to him, his face as shameful as his words. He couldn't help it. He snorted. He knew he shouldn't find people who were obviously in distress adorable in any sense of the word, but Midoriya was making it very hard not to. Hitoshi gently pushed his wrists away, smiling when red-rimmed eyes warily met his. "Midoriya, did you check in my room for her?" No, of course I didn't," he insisted vehemently, then hesitated, his face creasing with anxiety. Should I have checked there first?" Hitoshi offered an impish shrug. "Maybe, but I doubt you would have." He shrugged, admiring the way Midoriya's face colored. "There is a hiding place in my closet that she always uses against people who haven't played hide-and-seek with her before. She's probably there." So, Midoriya started, his face slowly lifting from its crestfallen expression. "So she's not lost?" "She's not lost." And we can find her?" "We can find her together, yes." And they did. Hitoshi led them both to his room and made a beeline for his closet, shifting the bottom rack of clothing to the side and revealing a snoring Eri bundled up in one of Hitoshi's sweatshirts. She must have fallen asleep while Midoriya was counting, and then completely forgot she was playing hide-and-seek, nearly sending her babysitter into cardiac arrest. Only Eri. After depositing Eri on the bed to enjoy the rest of her abrupt afternoon nap, Hitoshi joined Midoriya in the living room, falling back heavily against the couch, the exhaustion of the previous hour finally catching up to him. The air between them was slightly tense and awkward. Midoriya was bundled into himself, his thighs hugged up against his chest, and his chin tucked underneath his knees. He looked small and scared, as if Eri were still missing. Hitoshi chewed the inside of his lip, observing him for a moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but Midoriya beat him to it. I'm really sorry about today. You had just come back from school, and you had to help me find Eri-chan. I should have been able to find her myself, and instead I forced you to help me. I'm sorry." Hitoshi silently gaped, his words entirely absurd. Midoriya continued, taking Hitoshi's silence as his cue to keep talking. If you're going to fire me, please tell Eri-chan that I really love spending time with her, and tell Aizawa-san that I'm sorry." "Midoriya, what?" Hitoshi interjected, jolted back into reality. "I'm not going to fire you." Midoriya glanced at him, his eyes red-rimmed again. "You're not?" he asked, his voice tiny. "Of course not." Hitoshi frowned, subconsciously scooting closer, aching to comfort. "Midoriya, today was an accident. Don't blame yourself for something Eri did." "But I lost her," he insisted poutedly, his eyes stubbornly glued to the ground. Hitoshi snorted. "She wasn't lost in the first place. Eri's just really good at hide-and-seek. Aizawa should have warned you about that." Midoriya begrudgingly giggled, his body slowly coming apart from its tense position. Then Hitoshi opened his big, stupid mouth. "Honestly, you probably could have found her a lot faster with your quirk. It's fine if you use it inside. I won't tell anyone." Midoriya's face paled, the mirth on his face gone in an instant. The tension was back worse than before. My quirk." Hitoshi shrugged, suddenly hesitant. Quirk talk was common amongst his classmates and in the hero world in general. Asking about someone's quirk was usually the go-to icebreaker for most new acquaintances. It was a safe topic for him. For Midoriya, however, that didn't seem to be the case. It garnered the opposite response he'd been hoping for. Instead of Midoriya going into depth about the happenings of his quirk, he seemed to be looking for a way to leave without Hitoshi trying to stop him. He'd said the wrong thing, asked the wrong question, but it was too late to take it back, and he'd put Midoriya in an uncomfortable position because of his desensitivity to quirks. "Aizawa showed me your file on your first day." Midoriya tensed, and Hitoshi rushed to defend himself. "I was just curious about you, and cautious. You were a stranger at the time, and you were going to be taking care of my sister. I was just worried, that's all." Right," Midoriya whispered, his voice smaller than ever. What did my file say? About my quirk?" Hitoshi chewed the inside of his cheek. Not much. Your mom's quirk is minor telekinesis. Says that in your file, so I assumed you had a similar quirk. Midoriya refused to meet his eyes as he uttered out his next sentence, his voice pathetically warbled. I don't have a quirk, he whispered. I'm quirkless. Hitoshi blinked, his heart sinking down into his stomach, suddenly realizing why Midoriya had been so reluctant to answer. He didn't have a quirk, and Hitoshi had practically forced him to say it. I should go. I feel a little sick. I'm sorry. Tell Aizawa-san and Eri-chan that I'm sorry. Midoriya scrambled off the couch, furiously wiping at his eyes. Hitoshi chased after him. Hey, no, wait, he called, keeping Midoriya in his place by the crook of his elbow. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. You being quirkless, it's fine. It doesn't matter. It does matter, Midoriya insisted, his face flushed and his voice watery. I can't protect Eri-chan without a quirk. If something were to happen, I'd be useless. That isn't true, Hitoshi frowned, holding him by his biceps, forcing his eyes on him. You weren't hired to be her bodyguard, and you've never needed a quirk to take care of Eri before, not when she fell and scraped her knee or when she lost her favorite stuffed animal. Midoriya coughed a surprised giggle, probably at the sudden memory of Eri running up and down the house, turning the place upside down looking for that damn stuffed bear. Hitoshi remembered that day annoyingly well. Mr. Hugs, Midoriya nodded, casting a fond smile off to the side. Mr. Hugs, Hitoshi confirmed, searching for Midoriya's eyes until they eventually, very hesitantly, met his. You're great. You're really great. Green eyes level with the ground, a self-deprecating look passing over his face. I don't know about that. I'm not special like you, or Eri-chan, or Aizawa-san. People with quirks, they make a difference in this world. I won't. Hitoshi gritted his teeth, suddenly offended. You're making a difference now, he insisted, holding him tighter. Aizawa chose you for a reason. Eri adores you. He stammered to a stop. We're friends. You made a difference for me too, and I bet there are hundreds of others who'd say the same. Midoriya flushed, suddenly bashful. That's a little much, he shrugged, inhaling a cleansing breath. But thank you for saying that. That was really kind of you. Hitoshi swallowed, his heart doing that strange squeezing thing it did whenever he so much as thought about Midoriya. Like you. I like you. Yeah, I was just being honest. You really are great. Midoriya smiled. Thank you. And I promise I won't say a word about this to Aizawa. Midoriya laughed, and all was good in the world. Thanks. Winters in Japan were never forgiving. Over time, schools had learned to adapt to the cold weather, but when the frigid cold became too much and a powdery white substance fell from gray clouds in the sky, schools usually called in a snow day. Eri rushed past him, in her snow gear, jumping into a pile of snow sitting on the front lawn. Hitoshi chuckled, burying his nose in a scarf to protect his skin from the bitter cold. Snow day. Hitoshi joined Eri on the front lawn, kicking piles of the powder into her hair, smiling at her little giggles. Snow days meant no school, which was always nice, especially being a UA Hero Course student. No school meant no homework, no hero training, no Midoriya. Hitoshi balked at the abrupt realization, then glanced over at Aizawa, who was allowing himself to be dragged by the hand by Eri to build a snowman. Aizawa was home. Hitoshi was home. Eri wasn't at school. Midoriya wouldn't be coming over today. There was absolutely no reason for him to be at the Aizawa Shinzo household at all today. And yet, Hitoshi pulled out his phone and clicked on Midoriya's contact. He would make a reason. Hi. Good morning. Hitoshi smiled. Are you coming over today? I don't think so. Does Aizawa-san need me to watch Eri-chan? Hitoshi glanced at Aizawa and Eri and considered lying, ultimately deciding against it, not wanting to risk the chances of getting caught in the middle of it. Not Aizawa, just me, really. I wanted to see you today. The snow's fun. It'll be more fun with you, if you'd like to come. You don't have to. I'm on my way. Hitoshi secretly fist-bumped behind Aizawa and Eri's backs and shoved his phone back into his pocket, anxiously awaiting Midoriya's arrival. It took all of 15 minutes for a bundled-up marshmallow status of puffiness Midoriya to stumble upon their snowman-building expedition. Nii-chan! Eri noticed him first, jumping away from the half-built snowman to tackle Midoriya's legs, nearly sending him tumbling to the ground. Eri-chan, hello, he giggled affectionately, brushing the snow out of her hair. Aizawa stared at them, and Hitoshi stared at Aizawa, hoping to God he didn't ask. "Why are you here?" "Shit." "I invited him," Hitoshi interjected, already sensing the waves of anxiety rolling off Midoriya's person. "For the snow. It's fun." Aizawa was staring at him now, his eyes holding his in a suspicious squint. "Right. The snow." Eri hopped up and down, resembling that of a baby bunny, overexcited and cute. "Nii-chan, help us make a snowman!" Midoriya happily nodded, his attention solely on her. Hitoshi childishly pouted from the ground, petulantly grumpy that he wasn't paying any attention to him. He hadn't even acknowledged him yet. Maybe because he hasn't seen me. Whatever. Hitoshi revealed himself from behind the snowman's base, dusting the snow off of his clothes and fixing the beanie slouched on his head. "Hey, Midoriya," he greeted, inching toward the pair and subtly nudging Eri out of the way. Midoriya smiled. Everything was good in the world. "Hi, Hitoshi-kun. It's good to see you. Thanks for inviting me over." Hitoshi's insides turned to mush. "Yeah, you too." Aizawa sighed across from them. "I'm going inside. Take care of Eri." "Sure," Hitoshi replied, not for a single moment taking his eyes off Midoriya's face. "Nii-chan," Eri said, tugging on Midoriya's hand, immediately getting his undivided attention for the second time in the span of 10 minutes. She was good. "Let's make a snowman." Midoriya nodded, allowing himself to be pulled away from Hitoshi's immediate proximity. Hitoshi couldn't help but pout again. "Okay, what do we need?" "We need a carrot, 3 pebbles, and 2 twigs," Eri readily replied. Hitoshi frowned, slightly perturbed. "Eri, Midoriya's here as a guest. I'll make him get things for you." Eri glanced over at him, her hands still entangled with Midoriya's, and her expression entirely serious. "I'm not making Nii-chan get things for me. I'm making Nii-san get things for me." Hitoshi nearly flinched. Nearly. "Excuse me?" "You heard the girl, Hitoshi," Aizawa drawled, stepping back onto the porch with a cup of steaming something. "Eri, you can't be serious," he borderline whined, unsure if he was offended over the fact that his little sister had seemingly picked a new favorite or that she was strategically using her cuteness to get him to do whatever she wanted. "Hurry up, Nii-san! We need that carrot yesterday," Eri cried, pointing to the house with a tiny finger. Midoriya stood behind the tyrant, offering a sheepish smile and rosy cheeks. All offenses committed against him nearly became forgivable because of that look. "Fine," he grumbled, shoving his hands in the pockets of his jacket and stomping inside, glaring at a chuckling Aizawa as he brushed past him. Over the span of the next 3 hours, Hitoshi had since become demoted from favoritist brother of all time to servant. It was horrible, humbling, and above all, humiliating. He'd practically been tossed to the side, completely disregarded, and only called upon when Eri needed him to fetch or something. He'd barely gotten a chance to speak to Midoriya in the midst of it all, which only served to make him more pouty. They'd since moved the party inside after building 2 snowmen upon Eri's request, making snow angels, and engaging in a snowball fight. By the time they decided to retire from the snow, ready to head inside, they were shivering and ice-cold to the touch, despite being covered head to toe in winter clothing. Hitoshi and Eri wound up on the living room couch, bundled underneath a large fleece blanket, with the TV playing a rerun of a Gravity Falls episode. Midoriya busied himself in the kitchen, fully insisting on making them hot chocolate to help warm them up, and he was so adorably persistent Hitoshi couldn't help but allow him to do so. As if on cue, Midoriya quickly made his way back into the living room, holding a tray of 2 mugs and 1 plastic princess cup in his hands. "Drinks are ready," he smiled, setting the tray on the coffee table. "You're amazing," Hitoshi purred, grabbing a mug and simply holding the warm ceramic in his hands, relishing in the heat. Eri happily gulped hers down, humming in absolute delight. "Nii-chan, this is so yummy!" Midoriya flashed her a bright smile. "It's my mother's recipe. She used to make them for me all the time when I was your age." He grabbed his own mug and joined them on the couch, squeezing himself into a ball to retain the little warmth he could provide himself. Hitoshi watched him from the corner of his eye, his head screaming for him to offer some of the blanket he and Eri were sharing. It was definitely big enough to squeeze in a third person. All he had to do was ask. Easier said than done. That seemed to always be the case when it came to Midoriya. "Nii-chan, come share the blanket with us." Or he could just have Eri blurt it out for him. Anything was fair game so long as it worked in his favor. Midoriya's eyelash fluttered, his hot chocolate sloshing around in his mug as he vehemently declined the offer. "Oh, no, I couldn't. I'm fine like this, I promise." Eri wasn't having it, and frankly, neither was Hitoshi. "The blanket's huge," he hinted, grabbing the other end of the fabric and making a show of outstretching the blanket. Midoriya squirmed, sipping his hot chocolate. I don't know. Are you sure?" "Very, very sure," Eri exclaimed, impatiently tugging Midoriya's pant leg. Hitoshi nodded sagely. "We're sure." Midoriya giggled, scratching at his cheek while simultaneously inching his way over to them. "Well, if you're that sure." When he scooted in close enough, Hitoshi took the liberty of draping the blanket over his shoulders, nearly wrapping his arm around him in doing so. Completely unintentional, sort of. "Thank you." Midoriya smiled, snuggling further into the blanket and inadvertently pressing their sides together. Hitoshi gripped his mug like a lifeline. Yeah. "You're welcome," Eri grinned, pressing between their thighs, putting an inch of space between them. Hitoshi grumbled while Midoriya giggled, binding the blanket tighter around all three of them, and smiling when Hitoshi caught his eye. The domesticity of it all was almost too much to bear. This could be his reality, his everyday life if he somehow managed to ask Midoriya out like he intended to do ages ago. Cuddling on the couch after school, taking care of Eri as if she were theirs. Hitoshi flushed, bringing his mug up to his mouth to at least try to obscure the blush. He'd never imagined himself wanting a life of domesticity. He'd never imagined sharing a life with anyone, period. But it was almost too easy. Midoriya made it so easy to imagine a life of unending happiness, especially with him right by his side throughout it all. By the time Midoriya had to call it a day and trek back to his own apartment, Eri was down for her nap, tucked away on the couch and pleasantly unaware of the sadness that came along with Midoriya's leaving. Hitoshi saw him out. "Thanks again for inviting me today, Hitoshi-kun. It was really fun," he said, dragging a scarf around his shoulders and bundling up in his coat. Hitoshi smiled, watching and enjoying. "You're always welcome here, not just to watch Eri." Midoriya nodded, his eyes downcast, but his expression pleasantly happy. "Thank you. I should get going now." In one swift motion, Hitoshi was grappled into a hug. It took him a few seconds to register what was happening, and who was happening to him. Midoriya touching him, pressed against him, holding him. He felt on fire. Every part of him Midoriya touched felt scorching, and everything leading up to that point boiled over. Can I take you out on a date?" Midoriya's arm squeezed tighter around him, and Hitoshi could hear his breathing hitch. He continued to babble, suddenly nervous, suddenly not as ballsy as he was just a second ago. I really like you, and I would love to take you out sometime. You don't have to say yes, obviously, but it'd be great if you did, because then I'd just look like an idiot right now." Midoriya giggled, finally, albeit painstakingly slow, pulled away from their embrace, keeping him at arm's length. "Hi," Hitoshi stupidly said, his voice breathy with anxiety. Midoriya smiled, his cheeks adorably rosy. I'd love to. Go out with you, I mean, because I also really like you, a lot." "Oh," Hitoshi sighed. "Oh, that's great. You're so great," he breathed, impulsively grabbing Midoriya by his cheeks and just holding him. "You're great, too," he giggled, his speech slightly garbled. "You're really great." "And I'm tired." The pair simultaneously flinched, instinctively jumping away from each other at the sound of a monotone voice. Aizawa stood just a few feet away from them, his stare unimpressed. "You guys are disgusting. Midoriya, go home. It's late." Yes, sir," he wheezed, scrambling for the door. He turned over his shoulder before he could leave and offered a wobbly smile. Good night, Hitoshi-kun. Aizawa-san." The door slammed, and Aizawa sighed. "The babysitter. Really?" Hitoshi smiled, nodding giddily. "Yeah, the babysitter. Midoriya, the babysitter." "Okay, you're disgusting." "Yeah," he sighed, stumbling all the way to his bedroom and collapsing on his bed face first, swooning. His phone briefly vibrated in his back pocket. Hitoshi quickly fished it out of his jeans, silently praying for it to be him. Midoriya. "Sorry for leaving so suddenly. Thank you again for inviting me. Also, I'm really excited for our date." Hitoshi grinned, practically asphyxiating himself against this pillow. "Me too." Then on a disgusting, horrible, lovesick whim, he added, "A heart." This was new. These feelings were new, Midori was new, and he was great. He was really, really great. Change was good, sometimes. All right, listeners, this concludes Not in the Job Description. Again, this is the first fic in this author's entire series entitled That One Shinzuku Babysitter AU. Hope you all enjoyed this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.